This is A New Angle, a show about cool people doing awesome things in and around Montana. I'm your host, Justin Angle. This show is supported by First Security Bank, Blackfoot Communications, and the University of Montana College of Business. Hey folks, welcome back, and thanks for tuning in. Today I speak with Heather McDowell, Vice President for Legal, Environmental, and Government Affairs for the U.S. region at Sibanye-Stillwater, the owner and operator of the Stillwater and East Boulder mines.
I think it's hard for those not doing this day to day to understand that we want to be robustly regulated. I don't want less government or less regulation.
Heather works at the intersection of many issues critical to Montana's future: environmental regulation and sustainability, workers' rights, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and many others. And if those topics weren't challenging enough, Heather and her colleagues have been struggling to recover from the massive flooding earlier this summer that shut down mine operations. Heather, thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, Justin, thanks so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here. This is amazing.
Yeah, so tell us, where did you grow up and what did your parents do?
Well, actually, a past tense, it's a current tense for what they're doing. I grew up on a ranch in Bridger, and my parents are still running the ranch. So we have a small cow-calf operation, in some pretty rough but very beautiful country there. And just, I grew up, working alongside everyone. I think by the time I was 5 or 6, we were out changing irrigation pipe and do all of our cattle work, riding. And so my mom and I did all the riding. And yeah, it was a true family operation. I remember going to law school at Gonzaga my first day and thinking, like, this is the greatest thing that's ever happened to me, right? This is easy. This is everyone else was complaining about the time we would have to quote unquote work. And I was thinking, gosh, this is a great vacation. So yeah, it was just a real privilege to grow up that way. I think working side by side with your family.
Sure. And talk about, you came to the University of Montana, studied accounting, and then you just mentioned studying law at Gonzaga. Yeah, talk about your choice to depart from the ranch in the work sense, but I'm sure you do plenty of work when you go back and visit your folks and family.
Yeah. So when I was growing up, I think, every kid has some sort of aspiration. And by the time I was about 10, I had decided I was going to be a lawyer, and everyone says, oh gosh, you must have had some inspiration, some role model. I said, well, my dad is a cowboy, right? He's as cowboy as they come. And my whole childhood, he had said, Heather, you can be anything you want. The world is yours. You just can't be a damn lawyer. And so by the time I was about 10, I just said, I think I'm going to be a lawyer. I have no idea what a lawyer is or what a lawyer does, but that's what I'll do. And then he had tagged onto it at some point, and you also can't go to school at Missoula. So it was sort of, I think, a really good example of why you don't give your kids too strict of instructions, because the two things I did were really the only things he said I couldn't do is attend school at Missoula and become a lawyer. So happy to have defied the odds there.
Well, it probably also says something about your work ethic and mentality growing up on the ranch in a strong family that, nobody can tell you what not to do, right?
I think that's exactly it, Justin. Yeah, it is. It's sort of, watch me, right? Tell me I can't do something, and then I will do it just for the sake of proving that I can. So, and I think I definitely inherited that personality. So I don't know if he knew what he was doing at the time. I really do think deep down he did not want me to become a lawyer or to go to Missoula. So the personality trait of stubbornness and perseverance are definitely genetic.
Here we are. Well, speaking of perseverance, we got a lot to get into today, but first, give us the state of play. One of your mines was shut down with the flooding event back in June. How are things going? How are you all kind of holding up?
Yeah, it's been a crazy experience. So on June 13th, which was otherwise this beautiful sunny day, the Stillwater River was raging. So we operate Stillwater Mine in Stillwater County, and then the East Boulder Mine out of McLeod over in Sweetgrass County. And then we have a metals processing facility down here in Columbus, where I am today. And so at the Stillwater Mine, the Stillwater River usually runs at about 3,000 CFS. It was up to 20,000 CFS on June 13th. And our operations actually held up really well. We didn't have any damage on site other than to a bridge that our operations span the Stillwater River. A bridge was damaged, but then it washed out the county highway going up to the mine, and actually also really unfortunately going up to the Woodbine Campground and the Sioux Charlie Trailhead, which are highly trafficked recreational sites. And so that's been a really sad fact too, is that those have been closed down. But we have not been operating at the Stillwater mine since, the early morning hours of June 13th.
Did you have people stranded, up at the mine with that road washing out?
No, we didn't. We had a way to go around. So we didn't actually have stranded people. I think one great thing our people did on the first day is that there were about 70 campers up at the Woodbine Campground, and they had to get out. So there was a full search and rescue effort, and our folks sort of chipped in there. Then they were able to bring them to the mine site, where from there we could get them transported down the valley and eventually got them all out and home. And we're able to then have them come back later in the week and recover their vehicles. So that all went really well. All of our people were fine. We did leave, I think, about 60 people on site just to kind of, make sure that we were maintaining our systems and really making the plan for recovery.
Yeah. And so what happens to the folks that aren't able to go to their shifts? Are they claiming unemployment, or what's the status of those folks?
Yeah, well, we've continued to pay folks regardless of whether they're working. So everyone who works at the Stillwater mine is getting their base pay. For some, that's not everything, because we do have a fair number of employees, especially our miners who are actually doing the mining, who also work on incentive pay. So they're not getting what they would get in the miners' case if they were actually coming and performing their job functions. But, everyone is getting base pay. They've retained all their benefits, and we're slowly just bringing people back as we get operations back up to speed.
Sure. So that is maybe a transition into this concept of responsible mining that I've heard you, in various venues refer to. Let's actually define that. What is responsible mining? What does it look like? What does it mean to you? And how do you and your colleagues think about it?
I think to me and to those of us here doing this work, I think it means conducting your operations in a way that your stakeholders are okay with, that the people who live next to you are okay with. I mean, we don't expect everyone to buy into this, right? Everyone is entitled to whatever views they have about extraction. But I think we need to continually be doing things in a way that people can live with, that we can actually be a neighbor, that, I like using the term neighbor as a verb. You neighbor with people. You help them do things. You make sure that what you're doing isn't a hardship for them. So I think that's what we try to do in carrying out this responsible mining. We're really fortunate that we have the Good Neighbor Agreement that I know many folks have heard about. It's a binding legal contract with Northern Plains Resource Council and 2 of its subsidiaries. And it's just been this amazing relationship over 22 years now. It was signed in 2000. And it really does allow this type of collaboration where these folks who are the entities and the individuals who have been really involved and just give huge amounts of their time and experience and intelligence and ideas. And so I think putting all that together, I think responsible mining is really working with your stakeholders, working with your actual neighbors, I think anyone who's adjacent in operations or anyone that you're affecting. We use the term stakeholder, which sounds a little bit cold and surgical, but I think just making sure that the people who your operations could affect are okay with how you're doing things.
Yeah, that makes sense. And maybe let's take a moment to talk about the sorts of materials that your operation mines. Palladium group metals is my understanding, but I don't think many listeners really know what that means.
Yeah, it's kind of a mouthful. So we produce platinum and palladium. We are about 78% palladium and 22% platinum. Okay. All of our products go to an entity that makes catalytic converters. So everything is mined at our sites, and then it's concentrated down at concentrating operations up at our site. It's brought down to our metallurgical complex, and then it forms what we call a filter cake. It's like a black sand quality that is really rich in platinum and palladium, and then it goes off to a catalytic converter manufacturer. So that's where our material goes.
Maybe it would be illustrative for the listener. Many folks who don't know mining, and I count myself as part of this group, we think of mining in terms of the legacy of extraction in Montana, mining operations that are closed down and gone bankrupt and have environmental degradation and Superfund and all these sorts of things. And that's a big part of Montana's history. And you talk about like how you all do it differently and how when your mines will eventually be closed down, what will that look like?
It's such a great question because our mines, a Stillwater mine opened in 1986, and that was coming right on the heels of really the disaster that was Butte. And then the East Boulder mine opened in 2001. Mm-hmm. And I really think that everything was set up to not have another situation like we created historically in Montana. And so maybe I'll start with the regulatory environment. We are operating under the Hard Rock Impact Act, and that was enacted in the mid-1980s. And so from a socioeconomic standpoint, and maybe I'll just start there and then move to the environmental piece, it really is a highly sophisticated way to operate. What it essentially does is that at Stillwater and East Boulder, we have the only two actual operating plans for the Hard Rock Impact Act for operating mines. And what it does is it requires the mine operator, us, to essentially, there's predetermined local affected units of government. And then the funding has to go to assure that the impacts from the mine can be handled by those local government units. And then there are funds that go to assure that they can do their governmental functions. And it really is a brilliant way to do this. We're just assuring that the governmental units locally are funded. And then they do what they need to do. They make the decisions. They make infrastructure and school and other choices as they're situated to do. And I'm just really proud of how that Hard Rock Impact funding and just the governance for it works. I don't think a lot of people know about it because, again, our mines are the only two operating under it. And, it's a pretty narrow group of folks that are impacted. And then I think I'm proud, too, of our very prevailing wages. Our average employee in Montana makes well over $110,000 before benefits. And so it creates this really nice structure where then they're well situated to also be, good community members. And so I think on the socioeconomic side, I'm just really proud of how sophisticated of a system Montana set up coming out of some of the historical mining events that weren't ideal.
We'll be back to our conversation with Heather McDowell after this short break. A New Angle is supported by First Security Bank, Blackfoot Communications, and UM's College of Business. Access to capital, broadband, and education are three ingredients any community needs for success.
Hey, this is Colter Nuanez from ESPN Missoula, and you're listening to A New Angle.
Welcome back to A New Angle. I'm speaking with Heather McDowell about responsible mining.
And then I think the same thing on the environmental side. Sometimes I think it's hard for those not doing this day to day to understand that we want to be robustly regulated. I don't want less government or less regulation. I mean, here we need to make sure that we have enough regulation that the people that we could impact, that they feel like they have a remedy and that the regulatory scheme is strict enough that there won't be impacts to them. And so we want a robust but certain regulatory environment. And I think that's what we have. If you look all across, from the environmental fleet here, water quality, tailings regulation it's very robust in Montana. And we're thankful for that. I don't think it's something where we want to, I guess I really just disagree with rolling back and rescinding regulation because I think we need to provide that sort of surety to people. It's a different world than it was a decade ago or 5 decades ago or whatever. And I think that it's a privilege to do this type of work. And a lot of responsibility comes with it. And I think the more that the regulations can match what those responsibilities are, the better. So In Montana, we also have, just for example, very strict water quality regulations. And that's a good thing. We also have a really sophisticated mine tailings governance scheme where any new tailings impoundments where we ultimately store our waste are subjected to a pretty strict fleet of regulations, including being reviewed by an independent review panel and having really strict closure and reclamation requirements, having concurrent reclamation requirements. So I think that's really both on the socioeconomic and the environmental side why things are different this time. And I think those differences are apparent. I mean, of course there are impacts, right? We work hard every day to try to lessen those impacts, but I do think that you can visibly see the difference. I mean, if you drive to our sites, it looks like a mining operation, but it looks like a much different mining operation than we may have had historically in Montana.
And I guess something that flows out of this is, how do y'all think about climate change? You're operating facilities with long time horizons. You're susceptible to environmental changes. I mean, whether or not we attribute the scale of the flooding event back in June to climate change, it happened. And, scientists say more of those sorts of events will happen. Some will directly affect operations. Some will affect the infrastructure you rely on to conduct your operations. How do you model for climate change?
Our goal is to create a climate resilient business and to ultimately help reverse climate change. Now, we are primarily a PGM, platinum, palladium, and a gold business, but we do have some lithium interests, some nickel interests, and we are on a strategy to become a larger green metals producer. And, at the core of if you look at our strategy, our corporate strategy, it is to build a climate resilient business and to advance this green metals strategy to ultimately help reverse climate change. So it's critical to us. And I mean, I think, again, it has to be for everyone. I think because a lot of these things that we do too, they're just about efficiency. Right? I mean, we have to, I think, make sure that we're using electricity and fuel and other resources efficiently. And I think regardless maybe of your philosophical beliefs on climate change, I do think looking at your carbon indicators when we look and we track scope 1, 2, and 3 carbon emissions. Mm-hmm. And when you look at when you sort of operationalize the things that will get you to reductions, I mean, frankly, there are things that responsible entities should be doing anyway, regardless of their philosophical beliefs on climate change. So I think everyone should be looking at this idea of efficiency. I mean, we happen to believe strongly in attempting to reverse climate change and to also create climate resilient businesses with the idea that we may have to withstand more of these events in the future. But again, even if that's not your entities or your personal mission, I really think it behooves everyone to think about those actual things that you do, regardless of the overarching belief, because I think everyone should be doing them.
In our remaining time, Heather, let's talk about another passion area for you, and that's diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think when people think of DEI, the mining industry is not one that comes to mind, but how is it operationalized in your industry, and how do you and your colleagues think about it?
Yeah, I think it's so important that we're doing it here in mining because I think there's so many excuses to not do it, right? And I think we have to try to be leaders and to say we're going to try to tackle this problem in a situation where it is a pretty big problem. I mean, statistically, we are not a diverse entity and it is not a diverse industry. And I think just tackling it head on and admitting that. And right now, I think the glory of doing it now is workforce shortages. And essentially in Montana, in our region, we're at full employment. So we have a really good business case. I mean, again, it's a little bit like climate change. I believe passionately in doing inclusivity because I think it makes things better for everyone. I think in these types of industries, and again, growing up on a ranch and I was in private practice for a while and then with utilities and really kind of have had a career in industries where there are a lot more men than women. And I think for a long time, I just thought that this is how it is. Just accepted the fact that it wasn't set up for most women to do. And then I started this job 10 weeks pregnant with twins. And I came into this job and I didn't have any leave. When you haven't worked at a place for a year, there really is no leave for that situation. So I was slated to go have twins on 4 weeks of vacation. And again, I have a lot of grit and resilience and just thought, well, this is, I can do this, right? This is doable. And got a little while into that and had amazing, healthy, happy babies. And we did survive it. It was, I have a supportive spouse who was very competent at childcare, which was exceptionally helpful. But then a few months into it, I remember hearing someone talk about, oh, well, there's this tax break for this, single mom of 3 kids and she can do whatever with the $600. And I really just had something sort of switch in my brain and thought, that's crazy talk. So, for that $600 tax credit and $49,400 more, she too can afford to work because at the time, I was paying $50,000 a year in childcare costs. And everyone kept telling me, oh, Heather, this is so great. You're doing so great. You can do it. It can be done. You're a superwoman. This is amazing. Kind of like setting the stage of like, if you can do it, everyone can do it. And it just really, again, like flipped the switch where I thought, this is crazy. I mean, we are creating jobs that are unattainable by really anyone who has family responsibilities or who's not exceptionally privileged. I mean, the only reason I could keep a career and sort of have twins without a hitch is because I'm rich, right? I have a great job. I make a lot of money and I
Sure.
have a
Yep.
supportive family and a supportive spouse. And I'm in the 1% for privilege all the way around. And I think we're creating these jobs that, people can only do if they're privileged. And I think we have to stop doing that. We have to look at like what we really need from people. And I focus on women because that's my lived experience, right? I think
Yep.
you can attach this theory to any underrepresented group of people. And we have to stop having these unreasonable expectations, right? Where women either don't enter, it's kind of this first rung issue. They get into a job and then, okay, well, why don't you step up and do this next role? But they can't do the next role because it requires coming to a 7 a.m. meeting and their kids have to go to school. And there's no one to get their kids to school. And so they don't take the role for that simple fact. And I think that happens. I think it happens a lot in Montana. So we're here at Sibanye-Stillwater doing a full DEI initiative. I mean, it's slow work. I would not claim to have any great successes, but we're talking a lot about it. We're really involved in the women in mining organizations, both nationally and internationally. We're really just talking to people. We'll have calls and just talk about all these things, about having difficult conversations and about random things that we would do to create inclusive spaces and just try to get people talking about how we cannot put these like false barriers on people's advancement, that you miss so many good people. I think there are so many people not in the workforce because they couldn't meet these little barriers to entry.
Yeah, we narrow the funnels at the top on sort of artificially and unnecessarily, and it just really it cuts off opportunity for so many. I'm curious, Heather, within this context, I mean, you have a South African parent. South Africa has its own well-documented history of terrible treatment of marginalized groups, et cetera. Talk about how that interface works. Well, you're talking about domestically and here in Montana versus within the context of a South African-owned parent company.
Yeah, so we're all on the same crusade. It's really fascinating because we have a Women in Mining initiative in South Africa as well. And we're working together. I mean, it's the same initiative kind of, throughout the company. We're approaching it differently. I think in South Africa, it's so complicated. I mean, the history is so complicated and tragic. But I really think people are the same everywhere. I mean, obviously anyone who travels knows that I think
Sure.
no matter where you go, humans are humans and the problem is exactly the same. I think it's more challenging in both of these places because here, I think a lot of times people tout our jobs as being great because you can just have one job per family. I mean, which is fantastic. It's really fantastic if that's what that family wants to do.
Right.
However, if that family consists of two adults who both want to advance their careers, it gets really difficult because the schedules are really difficult, and the logistics of having like two of our jobs and having a family, and it gets really challenging. We're in South Africa. I mean, I do think the unemployment rate is, I think, functionally well over 50%. I don't know what the documented rate is, but I think it's fair to say that over half of the people who want to work are not working. And that's like a different scarcity situation. I think it sort of puts women in the same position almost, because here, I think in both places, the women here may not have the opportunity to work because their spouse has such a good job that, it's sort of lost in the shuffle that they're missing that opportunity. Where I think in South Africa, maybe it's often the men who can get the better job, and there's not the availability of jobs. But I think it presents the same problem. It means women have less opportunity.
And good to know that, you're talking about it across cultures and with different types of people and different types of organizations, etc. So Heather, as we close here, tell us a little bit about what you do for fun. I get the sense that you are into horses. What are you doing for fun this summer?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. It is a horse obsession. So yeah it's, I have a little fleet of horses at home. I'm into jumping, which is something I've gotten into relatively recently. I grew up rodeoing. I was actually on the rodeo team at Missoula, which was great fun a long time ago. But the summer is filled with horses, and I have a 7-year-old and twin 4-year-olds, and it's just utter chaos. I mean, it is dirt and water and kids that may or may not have clothes on, just all circulating around. And then in the midst of it, the horses are, just kind of hanging out and wondering when it's their turn. So yeah, it's just, my summer is utter chaos, honestly, Justin.
Well, in some ways that sounds like a lot of fun. Heather, it's been great to catch up. If folks want to learn more about you or Sibanye-Stillwater, where would you point them online?
Yeah, I think you can head to our website. You can, definitely reach out to me. We're happy to talk more about it. And I think, definitely, Justin, we'll have to get you up to see one of our sites sometime. So maybe we'll have you come out and see it for yourself.
I would like that. Okay, Heather, thanks so much, and happy trails.
Awesome. Thanks, Justin. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to A New Angle. We really appreciate it. And we're coming to you from Studio 49, a generous gift from UM alums Michelle and Lauren Hansen. A New Angle is presented by First Security Bank, Blackfoot Communications, and the University of Montana College of Business, with additional support from Consolidated Electrical Distributors, Drum Coffee, and Montana Public Radio. Keely Larson is our producer. VTO, Jeff Ament, and John Wicks made our music. Editing by Nick Mott. Social media by AJ Williams, and Jeff Neese is our master of all things sound. Thanks a lot, and see you next time.